In front of cameras, before investors dialing in from across the ocean, she laughed. Vanessa Caldwell, the powerful CEO of NovaDrive Technologies, pointed at the silent truck in the center of the hall, and then at the man who had been quietly tightening bolts in the shadows. "If you can fix this engine in 2 hours," she taunted, her voice cutting through the microphone feed, "then I'll marry you myself." The audience gasped. Some laughed nervously. Others stared in disbelief. The company's entire future, $50 million in European investment, maybe more, was hanging on the prototype. Yet instead of solving the problem, Vanessa had turned it into a public spectacle. And the man at the center of the storm, Malik Carter, the mechanic they called in at the last minute, stood silent. His hands were still greasy. His coveralls looked out of place in a room filled with tailored suits and polished shoes. He did not answer her insult. He only looked at the silent machine, as if listening to its quiet heartbeat. What happened in the next 2 hours would not only shock the investors, but change the company forever. If you believe dignity should never be optional, tap like to help this message travel. The lights in the demonstration hall glared down with the intensity of a courtroom spotlight. The Atlas prototype, NovaDrive's proudest invention, a self-driving truck, sat motionless at the center. Its engine had died during the live demo at precisely 14 minutes and 37 seconds into the trial run. The silence that followed was more humiliating than any explosion. For weeks, this event had been advertised as the future of freight transport. German investors led by Herr Klaus Reinhardt had flown in, their checkbooks heavy with promises of $50 to $67 million. Cameras were rolling. The live stream was broadcast to analysts and reporters worldwide. The atmosphere was electric, but not with excitement. Electric with dread. Vanessa Caldwell's smile was sharp, but her eyes betrayed fury. For her, this was more than just an engine stalling. It was her credibility collapsing. And in her panic, she sought someone to blame. Her gaze landed on Malik Carter. He had not been scheduled to appear in this room. He was a diagnostics specialist who usually worked behind the scenes, a man who fixed problems quietly without fanfare. He was not a polished executive, not an engineer with a doctorate, not a face the company would normally place before investors. He was, to Vanessa, the perfect scapegoat. "You," she said, her voice echoing. "You're supposed to know engines, aren't you?" Malik lifted his head slowly, his expression calm but unreadable. The audience shifted, sensing drama. Vanessa's words grew sharper, louder, tinged with arrogance. 2 hours, she declared. "Fix it, or everyone here will see exactly what kind of fraud you are. In fact," she smirked, "if you manage to fix it, Malik, I'll marry you myself. That's how impossible this is." The words sliced through the room like broken glass. Laughter rippled among a few nervous employees. Phones were raised. The humiliation was now immortalized on the internet. Herr Reinhardt frowned, whispering something to his aide. To European investors, this was not leadership, it was chaos. But no one dared interrupt the CEO. Malik stood still. His calloused hands rested at his sides, stained with oil and years of unseen labor. His posture did not change, but his silence was louder than Vanessa's jeer. The prototype remained dead, a giant hulk of machinery and failed promise. And yet, Malik did not argue, did not defend himself, did not lash back. He only looked at the truck, its panels gleaming under the lights, its silence like a held breath. To him, the machine was not a corpse. It was a voice struggling to be heard. Vanessa, satisfied with her performance, turned back toward the investors. "Gentlemen," You will see the problem for yourselves. Sometimes, it takes humiliation to expose incompetence. Her words hung in the air, sharp and cutting. But behind her, Malik took a single step toward the machine. The camera feed caught his expression, focused, listening, as though the truck was humming a tune only he could hear. Dr. Sofia Mendez, the technical auditor appointed for transparency, watched closely. Unlike Vanessa, she did not smirk. She saw something in Malik's stillness, a confidence that was quiet but unshaken. The investors waited. The staff whispered. The live stream chat exploded with comments. And in the center of it all, Malik Carter bent toward the Atlas prototype, resting one hand on its frame like a doctor placing a hand on a patient's chest. He did not hear silence. He heard rhythm gone wrong, a song out of key. This was no ordinary challenge. This was humiliation broadcast live. But it was also an opening, an invitation to prove that merit, not mockery, decides destiny. The countdown had begun. The Atlas prototype remained still at the center of the hall, its silence echoing like a verdict. The audience of investors and employees shuffled uneasily, as if the quiet were louder than any mechanical roar. Somewhere in the back, an assistant typed furiously, updating the press release draft that had suddenly gone from triumph to disaster. NovaDrive Technologies had staked everything on this day. The company was once a darling of Silicon Valley, a symbol of futuristic promise. Its vision was bold: autonomous trucks that could cross continents without a driver, guided only by sensors, algorithms, and the steady pulse of engineering. But in recent years, cracks had appeared. Delays piled up. Rumors of mismanagement circulated. Rivals gained ground. And now, in the moment designed to silence critics, the company's crown jewel had collapsed before it could even make its case. At the center of this storm stood Vanessa Caldwell. Her posture was impeccable, her navy blue suit tailored to perfection, but her pride was fraying. To outsiders, she was the confident leader who had charmed investors and dominated boardrooms. Inside the company, however, she was known differently: sharp, impatient, unwilling to listen to those she considered beneath her. Her leadership style was a sword that cut both ways. She could electrify a room, but she could also leave scars. Many employees whispered about the emails she sent at midnight, dripping with sarcasm and thinly veiled contempt. One line, leaked not long ago, had become infamous among staff. Ideas are like children. Most are better off never being born. For Vanessa, authority meant belittling others until they yielded. Now, with millions at stake, she had chosen her next target: Malik Carter. Malik had not sought this spotlight. He had been in the background, working diagnostic checks on a smaller fleet of test vehicles. His reputation among fellow technicians was one of quiet brilliance, a man who rarely raised his voice, but whose insights had saved more engines than anyone could count. He was not decorated with degrees, though he had studied late at night for certifications while working full-time. His learning had been carved from grease, sweat, and long hours in machine shops. Yet in Vanessa's eyes, that background was exactly what made him disposable. "This company cannot afford mediocrity," she declared, her microphone picking up the clipped edges of her voice. "If he fails, at least we'll all see the truth." The live stream carried her words far beyond the hall. Screens flickered in Munich, Berlin, and Frankfurt, where Herr Klaus Reinhardt and his team of investors sat with hands folded, faces unreadable. In New York, analysts whispered over coffee about stock slides. On social media, hashtags formed like storm clouds. Every second was amplified. Beside the stage, Dr. Sofia Mendes adjusted her glasses. She had been appointed as an external technical overseer, a safeguard meant to assure investors that the trial would follow proper standards. She had published papers on safety tolerances and was known for her meticulous eye. Watching Vanessa's theatrics, Sophia's lips pressed into a thin line. Oversight, she knew, was not only about machines. It was about culture, fairness, the human element that so often decided whether a project soared or crashed. In the crowd, employees shifted nervously. They had seen this play before. Vanessa would turn pressure into theater, pushing someone to the edge to prove a point. Few ever pushed back. To work at NovaDrive was to walk a line between innovation and humiliation. And now Malik was the one on that line, under the glare of cameras and the mocking promise of marriage for success. Malik, however, did not look at Vanessa. He kept his eyes on the Atlas truck, the lifeless frame of steel and circuits. To him, machines were never just machines. He had once told a colleague, "Engines speak. The trick is to learn their language." Now, in this hall, heavy with judgment, he leaned on that belief. He stepped closer, running his hand along the chassis. His movements were slow, unhurried, as if he were in his own workshop instead of a corporate coliseum. The cameras zoomed in, capturing the glint of oil on his fingers. To the investors, this may have looked like hesitation. To Sofia Mendes, it looked like concentration. Vanessa's voice rang out again, slicing through the moment. "Do you intend to stare at it until the money appears, Mr. Carter?" Laughter rippled in the hall. Even a few employees chuckled, though their eyes darted nervously toward the investors. Malik said nothing. Silence had always been his shield. Where others filled air with arrogance, he listened. On the live stream, comments scrolled by. "He looks lost. This is embarrassing. CEO is savage." Yet buried among the noise were other voices. "Give him a chance. He seems calm." Sometimes the quiet ones know the most. The company itself was at a crossroads. If Malik failed, NovaDrive might lose its final shot at survival. If he succeeded, the glory might not belong to the CEO, but to the mechanic she had mocked. Either way, the culture of the company was being revealed to the world, arrogance at the top and quiet resilience at the bottom. The board members sat in tense silence. David Lynn, the chair, watched with arms folded, his expression unreadable. He had clashed with Vanessa before, but in public settings he remained cautious. Angela Price, head of HR, scribbled notes furiously. To her, this was more than a performance. This was potential liability. Public humiliation of an employee was not just bad taste. It was a violation of workplace dignity, something that could spiral into lawsuits or investor revolt. And so the stage was set. A company in crisis, a CEO gambling reputation for spectacle, a mechanic carrying the weight of survival. The hall's clock ticked forward. 2 hours. That was the challenge. 2 hours to resurrect the Atlas or collapse beneath the weight of mockery. Malik inhaled deeply, as if drawing courage not from the crowd, but from the silent machine before him. To others, it was a broken truck. To him, it was a song waiting to be retuned. He rolled up his sleeves. The countdown had begun. The livestream cameras panned across the room, sending every expression, every whisper, across time zones. In Berlin, it was already evening. In Frankfurt, business leaders leaned over their screens with glasses of wine untouched beside them. In Munich, Herr Klaus Reinhardt sat in a dark-paneled office, the curtains drawn against the fading sun. His expression was carved from stone, but his eyes did not blink as they followed the image of the stalled truck and the man now tasked with reviving it. For Klaus, This was more than theater. It was mathematics. A failed prototype meant a failed investment. And though NovaDrive's marketing had painted this day as inevitable success, the reality was harsher. He had seen companies collapse for less. Behind him, one of his aides muttered in German, "Why entrust everything to a mechanic?" Klaus did not respond. He had learned in decades of business that sometimes the quietest figures held the most weight. Still, his fingers tapped the table with measured doubt. 2 hours, he thought. 2 hours to either win us or lose us. Across the ocean, the American press latched onto the drama like birds circling a wounded animal. News outlets replayed the moment of the engine's death at exactly 14 minutes and 37 seconds, looping it like a crime scene tape. Talk show hosts speculated whether NovaDrive would even exist by the end of the quarter. Hashtags spread, engine failure, marriage bet, NovaDive instead of NovaDrive. Inside the hall, the atmosphere thickened. The crowd had shifted from embarrassment to anticipation. Malik Carter stood before the Atlas, his hand still resting on the frame. For some, he looked like a man frozen, uncertain. For others, those watching more closely, he looked like a man listening. Dr. Sofia Mendes adjusted her position in the front row. She had spent her career analyzing machines, teaching students that mechanical systems, however complex, always spoke in patterns. But what she saw in Malik's posture was not academic. It was instinct. She leaned slightly forward, whispering to the colleague beside her. "He's not stalling. He's reading." The colleague gave a skeptical shrug, eyes flicking toward Vanessa Caldwell, who continued to smile as though she controlled the entire play. Vanessa thrived on performance. She believed charisma outweighed competence, that bravado erased mistakes. Yet her smile had tightened at the edges. Even she understood that the investor's silence was not approval. It was judgment biding its time. Backstage, employees clustered around laptops and tablets, watching the feed, reading the torrent of online comments. Some snickered cruelly. "He'll never pull this off." Others shook their heads with sympathy. "Poor guy. He didn't ask for this." A few, those who had worked closest with Malik, whispered differently, "Don't count him out." The weight of those voices pressed invisibly against the hall, layering the silence with expectation. Malik inhaled deeply. He did not look at Vanessa. He did not look at the investors, or at the cameras, or even at the employees watching from the wings. He kept his gaze steady on the machine, the Atlas prototype that had betrayed its promise. To Malik, the truck was not a failed product. It was a puzzle. Machines, he often believed, had personalities. Some were stubborn, some temperamental, some fragile. This one felt proud, built for glory, but carrying a secret ache. He crouched beside the base panel, his hands moving slowly, reverently, as if removing a cover from a treasured instrument. The cameras caught every motion. He did not rush. He did not reach for tools immediately. Instead, he listened again, leaning close, hearing the faint echoes of where metal had trembled, where alignment had faltered. Vanessa's voice interrupted. "You could at least pretend to know what you're doing." The line earned another ripple of laughter, but it was thinner this time, more forced. Even some who laughed looked quickly toward the investors, gauging whether mockery was still safe. Herr Reinhardt, watching from Munich, leaned closer to the screen. He was a man trained to read details, and he saw what others missed. The mechanic's fingers lingered on joints, on the spaces between components, not with confusion but with familiarity. This was not guesswork. This was recognition. One of his aides asked, "Do you think he has a chance?" Klaus answered softly, "Machines tell the truth. The question is whether anyone listens." In New York, stock analysts scribbled notes as they watched. The fate of a company was being tested not by algorithms or executives, but by a single man in oil-stained coveralls. To them, the image was almost poetic, the mighty reduced to the humble, the loud overpowered by the quiet. Back in the hall, Dr. Mendez rose slightly. She cleared her throat, her voice calm but resonant. "Mr. Carter, do you require additional time from the Oversight Committee? Safety protocols allow for an extension if diagnostic testing exceeds 2 hours." Malik lifted his head. His voice was low, but it carried. "No, I'll work within the limit." It was the first time he had spoken since Vanessa's taunt. The words were simple, but their weight shifted the room. He was not asking for sympathy. He was not stalling. He was committing. The investors exchanged glances. The audience fell quiet. For a moment, Vanessa's smirk flickered, as if she had expected him to fold. Malik returned to the engine, steady as stone. The countdown clock above the stage began its slow march towards 0. 2 hours. One man, a company's future hanging in the balance. And for the first time that day, the investors were no longer watching Vanessa Caldwell. They were watching Malik Carter. The hall had grown so silent that even the whir of the overhead lights felt loud. But silence, Malik knew, never stayed empty for long. Into that quiet, rushed whispers, sideways glances, and the glow of screens. Someone's phone buzzed, then another. Within minutes, news spread across the hall. Internal emails, supposedly private, had surfaced. Screens lit up with subject lines like sparks in the dark. "The janitor thinks he's an engineer. Maybe he should stick to sweeping floors. This is the best comedy I've seen in years." They were written by NovaDrive employees. Some carried Vanessa Caldwell's sharp tone, unmistakable in its cruelty. Others came from managers eager to mirror their leader, hoping to curry favor by mocking the mechanic now thrust into the spotlight. The timing was no accident. These emails had been circulating for weeks, passed quietly between offices, turned into inside jokes. But now, in the heat of the live stream, someone had leaked them. Investors saw them, reporters saw them, and Malik himself saw them on a tablet thrust into his hands by a sympathetic technician. He read them slowly. His eyes moved over the words like someone reading a story written about a stranger. The insults stung, but not with surprise. He had lived with that tone before, dismissed at school for not having the right background, passed over in workshops for lacking the right degree. This was not new. What was new was that it was all public now, visible to the world. In the back row, HR Director Angela Price felt her stomach drop. She recognized several names in the threads. To her trained eye, this was not merely bad behavior. It was workplace harassment. And worse, it was documented, digital, undeniable. Board Chair David Lynn leaned closer, speaking in a whisper meant for Angela alone. "If this is real, liability could be catastrophic." Angela nodded, tightly. "And culturally, it tells the world exactly who we are." On the stage, Vanessa pretended not to notice. She smiled for the cameras, as if nothing had happened, as if the cruel words swirling through inboxes had not just been revealed to investors. But the tightness around her eyes betrayed her. She had been reckless, and recklessness left trails. Dr. Sofia Mendes glanced at Malik. She wondered what he would do now. Would he walk away? Would he argue? But Malik did neither. He folded the tablet quietly and placed it on a nearby table. Then he returned to the engine. His silence unsettled the room. Vanessa's sarcasm had been sharp. The leaked emails were cruel. Yet Malik met all of it not with protest, but with focus. He bent once again over the Atlas prototype, as if the insults were wind blowing past him, while he listened for something deeper, the whisper of the machine itself. In the livestream chat, opinions began to split. Some jeered, emboldened by the emails. So he really is a janitor. This is embarrassing. But others pushed back. Look at him, he's not rattled. Maybe the emails say more about the culture than about him. In Munich, Reinhardt's aide frowned. This is humiliation stacked on humiliation. Reinhardt's reply was cool. Or it is a test. And sometimes those tested reveal more than those who mock. Employees in the wings shifted uneasily. A few had written those very emails. Now their words were being dissected by investors and strangers online. Their laughter no longer felt safe. It felt dangerous. Vanessa, sensing the shift, raised her voice again. Do hurry, Mr. Carter. The world is watching. Unless, of course, you prefer to play the martyr. The remark landed flat. Even among those who once chuckled at her cruelty, unease grew. It was one thing to joke behind closed doors. It was another to weaponize humiliation in front of investors, regulators, and cameras. Malik's hands moved with quiet precision. He unbolted a panel, setting each screw carefully in a line, as if order itself was a form of resistance. His mind did not linger on the words thrown at him. Instead, it focused on the faint scarring on a component, the tiny misalignment that hinted at vibration. To him, this was not theater. It was diagnosis. He had always believed that machines failed not out of malice, but out of neglected details. And neglected details were his specialty. Sophia scribbled notes. She saw the way his eyes scanned, not frantically but steadily, absorbing more than he revealed. She leaned toward the investors nearby. Do not mistake quiet for weakness. Some of the most accurate diagnostics come from those who observe before they act. Her words, though softly spoken, carried into the live stream microphones. Viewers caught them. Comments shifted. Interesting point. Maybe he's the real expert here. Angela Price, still pale from the email leak, whispered again to David, Lynn. If he succeeds, the optics change everything. If he fails, we're not only incompetent, we're cruel. David's reply was heavy. Either way, the board cannot ignore what's been revealed tonight. The hall's tension thickened. Every movement of Malik's hands was broadcast. Every click of a screw echoing like a drumbeat in the silence. The humiliation had been sharp, but now something else was forming. A quiet defiance, a dignity that absorbed blows without shattering. Vanessa, watching him work, tapped her fingers against the podium. She was used to immediate submission, to employees shrinking under her gaze. Malik's refusal to respond rattled her more than any shouted protest could have. Silence, she realized, could be rebellion. The countdown clock ticked. 90 minutes remained. Emails burned on screens. Investors leaned forward. And Malik Carter, the man mocked as a janitor, bent lower to the machine, listening to its secrets. The war of words had ended. The war of proof had begun. The countdown clock above the stage glowed red, its digits marking the passing of every second. To the investors watching around the world, those numbers were not just time. They were money, reputation, and proof. 2 hours. That was the window. Enough time, perhaps, for a miracle. Or enough time for the humiliation to deepen until no reputation could survive. Vanessa Caldwell stood near the podium, her posture as sharp as her words. "Ladies and gentlemen," she announced to the investors, "you now have the privilege of watching accountability in action. Our so-called expert has 2 hours. At the end of it, either the Atlas prototype runs, or we close this chapter and move forward without illusions." The phrase "without illusions" dripped with venom. It implied that Malik was the illusion, a shadow mistaken for substance. The hall buzzed with murmurs, cameras tilted forward. The sound technician adjusted levels so every click of a tool, every sigh, every word would be amplified across the live stream. Malik Carter remained quiet. He wiped his hands with a rag, rolled up his sleeves, and approached the Atlas. His motions were steady, unhurried, but under the spotlight they looked magnified, as though each gesture carried the weight of a verdict. Dr. Sofia Mendez stood and addressed the audience. Her tone was calm, measured, without theatrics. "For clarity, I have been asked to oversee the process. My role is independent. I will ensure that safety standards are maintained and that no shortcuts jeopardize either the test or the integrity of the prototype." Her words were not meant to flatter or to shame. They were meant to anchor. And yet, even those steady words had a ripple effect. Investors leaned in, reassured that someone impartial would be watching not only the machine, but the culture surrounding it. Vanessa gave a thin smile. "By all means, Doctor. Watch as long as you wish. It will not change the outcome." Sophia met her gaze without flinching. For a moment, silence stretched between them, arrogance facing calm authority. Then Sophia nodded and turned her attention to Malik. "Mr. Carter," she said, "you may begin." Malik inclined his head. He did not offer a speech, did not announce intentions. Instead, he knelt by the base of the truck and began to remove the first panel. The camera zoomed in. The sound of metal unscrewing echoed in the speakers, strangely intimate, like the first notes of a performance. The livestream chat scrolled rapidly. Finally, some action. "He looks nervous. Watch, he'll break it worse." But others typed with cautious hope. "He's focused. Look at his hands, steady." Every movement was theater now. Malik did not intend it as performance, but that was what it had become. Corporate theater. A mechanic's labor turned into a spectacle for executives and strangers. Vanessa leaned into her microphone. "Do hurry, Mr. Carter. Investors do not have all day." Malik did not respond. He set each screw carefully in a neat line beside him, the order of the pieces reflecting the order of his mind. He touched the exposed housing gently, as if feeling for warmth, for vibration, for the faint memory of motion. Sophia took notes, her expression unreadable. She had seen arrogant engineers rush and fail. She had seen quiet ones take their time and succeed. She wondered which this moment would prove. Minutes passed. Malik adjusted wires, inspected couplings, tapped gently along a shaft, listening for resonance. To the untrained eye, it looked like stalling. To the trained ear, it was diagnosis. In the back, Angela Price scribbled more notes, documenting not only the process, but also Vanessa's barbed commentary. HR knew patterns when they saw them. This was more than one insult. It was systemic, a culture cultivated from the top. The board members whispered among themselves. David Lynn spoke softly. "She is risking not just this project, but the company's future. If he fails, her words will become our downfall. If he succeeds, her words will still condemn her." Angela nodded. There is no winning path left for her. Vanessa, oblivious or unwilling to see the danger, continued to smirk. She leaned close to a cluster of investors in the front row. Do not be fooled by the performance. A machine like this requires far more than trial and error. He is playing at competence. But Malik was not playing. He was listening. He closed his eyes briefly, resting one hand flat against the steel. To others, it might have looked strange, like prayer, like superstition. But for him, it was memory. Years of listening to engines had taught him that machines spoke in rhythm. They hummed, they shook, they whispered their ailments, if only someone paused long enough to hear. The hall seemed to hold its breath. Sophia broke the silence. Observation before intervention is valid practice, she noted for the record. Machines often reveal what they need if you do not rush to fix what you do not yet understand. Her words floated into the live stream feed, soft but steady, reminding the world that patience could be a form of intelligence. The countdown clock showed 1 hour and 40 minutes remaining. Still plenty of time, yet the tension pressed like a weight. Every tick of the seconds felt like a drumbeat in the chest. Malik opened his toolbox. He did not pull out flashy instruments or advanced scanners. He chose a simple stethoscope, an old mechanic's trick, borrowed from medicine. He placed its tip against the housing, listening as he turned the shaft gently by hand. Viewers in the chat reacted with surprise. Is that a doctor's tool? What is he doing? But then one wrote, he's listening to vibration. My grandfather did that in his garage. The image was striking. A man in coveralls using a tool of healing to diagnose not a patient, but a machine. Sophia's eyebrows rose, impressed. She scribbled in her notebook, listening as diagnostic method, low tech, high insight. Vanessa scoffed loudly enough for the microphone to catch. This is absurd. We brought him here to fix an engine, not play doctor. But in that moment, even investors began to see a difference. One of Reinhardt's aides whispered, perhaps absurdity is closer to genius than she realizes. The red digits above continued their march downward. 90 minutes. The hall was no longer mocking. It was watching. The jeers had quieted. The whispers had shifted. For the first time that day, Malik Carter was not a target of laughter. He was the center of suspense. The hall had transformed into something far beyond a technical demonstration. It had become a stage, and everyone inside knew it. Cameras circled like watchful eyes, catching every angle of Malik's slow movements. Investors leaned forward as if this were not about bolts and wiring, but about character and truth. Employees, once confident in the safety of anonymity, now found their smirks fading under the glow of a world watching. It was corporate theater, and Vanessa Caldwell thrived in theater. She was not an engineer. She was not a mechanic. She was an actress in a suit, playing the role of authority. Is he fixing it? She said loudly into her microphone. Or is he praying for a miracle? The remark rippled across the hall, met with laughter from only a few. Most stayed silent, uncomfortable. What once had felt like leadership now sounded like cruelty. Malik did not respond. He tightened one coupling with deliberate care, then paused, listening. The stethoscope against the housing picked up faint tremors, barely audible to anyone else. He shifted slightly, adjusted, listened again. His stillness was unnerving. To Vanessa, it looked like hesitation. To Dr. Sofia Mendes, seated in the front row, it looked like expertise. Sophia spoke, her voice calm but firm. For the record, precision requires patience. Machines reveal themselves when given attention. The statement was simple, but its weight landed. Investors noted it. The live stream audience repeated it in comments. Patience reveals precision. The phrase began to echo like a motto. Vanessa's smile thinned. She had underestimated Sophia, assuming the auditor would stay quiet. But Sophia was protecting more than Malik. She was protecting the integrity of the test. Meanwhile, Malik continued. He removed a second panel, exposing the inner structure. He ran his fingers along a belt, stopping at a section where the material had worn unevenly. His brow furrowed. He tugged lightly, listening again. A whisper passed through the employees at the side. He found something. Malik looked up briefly, scanning the audience, then returned to his work. He was not rushing, but he was not stalling either. His method was steady, like a musician tuning an instrument string by string until harmony returned. "Do you plan to finish today?" Vanessa snapped. Her words hit sharper now, not because they were crueler, but because the room itself had changed. What once drew laughter now drew sighs. Investors frowned. Employees exchanged uneasy glances. Her interruptions no longer seemed witty. They seemed desperate. Reinhardt, watching from Munich, placed his elbows on the table and steepled his fingers. "The machine is secondary," he murmured to his aide. "This is about the culture. Do they ridicule competence or respect it?" His aide nodded, realizing the test was no longer about one truck. It was about NovaDrive itself. Back in the hall, Malik pulled a small notebook from his pocket. The pages were smudged with grease, corners curled from years of use. He scribbled quickly. Observations, numbers, notations. Not equations heavy with symbols, but simple reminders written in plain words. Vibration left shaft. Belt off by hair, check tolerance. Sophia tilted her head, noticing the notebook. She recognized the habit of a mind that worked through observation rather than bravado. The clock above showed 70 minutes remaining. Each red digit glowed like a heartbeat. The live stream chat scrolled furiously. "This is painful. Why is she mocking him? Look at the notebook. He's serious. And then, imagine if he actually pulls it off." Employees whispered near the back wall. Some had written the cruel emails. Now, watching him work, they felt unease settle in their stomachs. If Malik succeeded, their words would return like ghosts. Angela Price, the HR director, folded her hands tightly in her lap. To her, this was no longer just an engine demonstration. It was a textbook case study of hostile culture, broadcast live. Vanessa raised her voice again. "He's wasting time. Investors did not travel across oceans to watch a man take notes." Sophia stood. Her patience had thinned. "Ms. Caldwell," she said evenly, "I will remind you that interference during the diagnostic process compromises the fairness of the test. If you wish this to continue under my oversight, I ask that you allow him to work." The audience gasped softly. No one had spoken to Vanessa that way in years. For the first time, her smile cracked. She forced it back, but the tension in her jaw betrayed her. "Very well," she muttered into the microphone. Malik said nothing, only continued his work. He replaced one panel, not because he was finished with it, but because he had understood what it was telling him. His hands moved to another section, following the rhythm of discovery. It was not flashy. It was not dramatic. But slowly, the atmosphere in the hall shifted. Investors no longer watched Vanessa. They watched Malik. Employees no longer whispered jokes. They watched Malik. The live stream comments began to fill with curiosity rather than mockery. Sophia scribbled again, "Calm under pressure. Observational genius." Vanessa tapped her fingers nervously on the podium. For the first time, she was not in control of the stage. Malik set down his tools and leaned in, ear close to the machine, as if listening to a story told in metal. He closed his eyes for a moment, then opened them again, calm and certain. The countdown clock glowed. 1 hour, 10 minutes remaining. And for the first time, the hall felt less like a theater of humiliation and more like a courtroom awaiting truth. The hall had grown so still that the faint hum of lights above felt like thunder. Malik Carter knelt beside the Atlas prototype, his ear close to its steel body, his stethoscope resting lightly against the housing. The countdown clock glowed high above him. 1 hour left and falling. To the investors, his behavior looked unusual. They were accustomed to engineers with tablets, graphs, and data feeds. Malik, by contrast, looked almost old-fashioned, listening to a machine as if it were whispering secrets only he could hear. "Is he listening?" one investor murmured aloud. The words picked up by a microphone and carried across the live stream. The chat feed swirled with comments. "What is he doing? Machines don't talk. Is he stalling?" And then one comment that stood out. "Maybe they do talk, just not in our language." Malik's hand traced the panel softly. His face remained calm, eyes half closed, as though tuning into a rhythm. To him, machines were never silent. They had voices hidden in vibration, in the faint memory of motion, in the wear of their parts. You just had to know how to listen. He turned the shaft slowly by hand. The stethoscope picked up a faint, uneven tremor. It was not the roar of a broken engine. It was subtler than that, like a drum playing out of time with the rest of the band. Sofia Mendez leaned forward in her seat. She had taught generations of engineers, but rarely had she seen someone treat an industrial prototype like a musical instrument. Still, she recognized the method. Resonance, rhythm. He was searching for dissonance, for the note that did not belong. Malik opened his notebook again and scribbled in plain words, "Off key, check measurements, metric versus imperial mismatch." For weeks, engineers had examined the Atlas. They had checked algorithms, circuits, even rewritten code. But sometimes, the smallest overlooked detail unraveled everything. Malik looked up briefly, his voice steady. "This machine isn't broken. It's out of tune." The hall rippled with confusion. Vanessa Caldwell tilted her head with an exaggerated smirk. "Out of tune? What is this, a concert?" But Sophia's brow furrowed. "Explain, Mr. Carter." Malik wiped his hands on his rag. He spoke not with jargon, but in metaphors the whole room could follow. Think of music, a song played by an orchestra, every instrument in harmony. But if one violin is tuned just slightly wrong, not even a full note off, the whole piece feels wrong. This machine is that violin. Its parts were built on two different languages of measurement, metric and imperial, millimeters against inches. One side built for one rhythm, the other side built for another. They clash. The result is dissonance. A hush spread across the room. Even the investors who did not fully understand engineering leaned forward, drawn by the clarity of the image. "Are you suggesting," Sophia asked, "that the failure is not in the engine itself, but in a mismatch of standards?" Malik nodded once. "A difference thinner than a strand of hair can set off vibrations that shake the whole system. The longer it runs, the worse it becomes. What happened at 14 minutes and 37 seconds was not chance. It was the moment the dissonance grew louder than the harmony." The livestream chat burst alive. Metric versus imperial? That actually makes sense. Like the Mars probe that failed because of unit mismatch. Vanessa laughed harshly, her voice carrying through the speakers. So now our future depends on a man who thinks he's a conductor? Gentlemen, this is a truck, not a symphony. But her laughter no longer drew smiles. It grated against the silence of those who had begun to see something else. Not hesitation, but insight. Malik bent again, touching the coupling, eyes narrowing at the faint, uneven wear. He imagined the clash of measurements, the way a bolt designed in inches pressed against a part designed in millimeters, their misalignment causing a shiver that grew with each rotation. It's not about force, he murmured, half to himself. It's about balance, harmony. Sophia turned to the investors in the front row. What he describes is real. Standards exist for a reason. Mixing them can create invisible fractures. It would explain the sudden failure after a set time. Herr Reinhardt, watching from Munich, rubbed his chin. Harmony, he repeated, softly. Music I can understand. And so can my shareholders. In the wings, some employees whispered nervously. Could he actually be right? He's seeing something none of us did. If it's true, then all the mocking emails... Their words trailed off. Vanessa adjusted her jacket, irritation breaking through her polished exterior. This is speculation. We do not pay millions for fairy tales about violins and symphonies. But Malik was no longer listening to her. He was listening to the machine. The countdown clock glowed. 55 minutes. The world watched a man in oil-stained sleeves kneel by steel and circuits, treating them like an instrument out of key. In that moment, the humiliation no longer defined him. The listening did, and slowly, suspicion turned to curiosity. Could he truly hear what no one else had heard? The Atlas prototype loomed above him, a silent witness to his every move. Malik Carter knelt on the stage floor, the stethoscope still dangling from his neck, the rag folded neatly by his side. His notebook lay open, filled with smudged lines and simple sketches, nothing elegant, but every mark carried meaning. The countdown clock glowed high above. Just under 50 minutes now. The audience felt each second like a drop of water in a stone basin, steady, relentless. Malik traced his hand along a shaft, then paused at the joint where two parts met. To most eyes, it looked flawless, polished, fitted, secure. But to him, something was off. He squinted, running a finger across the seam. A faint unevenness, not a crack, not visible damage, but a whisper of imbalance. He tapped gently with the end of a screwdriver, listening. The sound was slightly sharp, not the low resonance he expected. It was like plucking a string stretched just a little too tight. Sophia Mendes leaned forward, recognizing the method. She had told her students countless times. Machines are not only seen, they are heard, they are felt. What Malik was doing was not superstition, it was discipline. Vanessa Caldwell crossed her arms, exhaling loudly. We cannot waste more time on finger-painting diagnostics. If something was wrong with that shaft, our engineers would have caught it months ago. Sophia glanced at her, then back at Malik. Perhaps they did not listen as closely. Malik turned to the audience at last, speaking in his steady, quiet voice. The mismatch is not large. You cannot see it with the eye. The difference is thinner than a strand of hair. But at high rotation, even that becomes thunder. He reached for a caliper from his kit, the simple measuring tool worn from use. Gently, carefully, he slid it across the joint. The numbers confirmed what his fingers had already told him. A fraction off. a measurement lost in translation between millimeters and inches. He did not announce the figure. He wrote it in his notebook, then looked back at the machine. This is why the truck lasted 14 minutes before failing. The imbalance grew with each rotation until it shook itself apart. The room murmured. Some nodded, others frowned. In the live stream chat, new comments scrolled rapidly. Invisible flaw. Hair-thin difference causes chaos. This is how the Mars Climate Orbiter was lost, right? Metric versus imperial. The idea spread quickly, transforming ridicule into curiosity. People began to recall famous failures caused by tiny mismatches. Suddenly, Malik's calm words seemed less like metaphors and more like truth. One of the German investors leaned toward Reinhardt and whispered in their language, "He has the eye of a watchmaker." Reinhardt gave the faintest nod. Meanwhile, employees in the wings exchanged anxious glances. They had dismissed Malik before, mocked him in emails. Now, watching his calm precision, they realized how blind they had been. Vanessa's voice cut through the tension, sharp as broken glass. "So you are telling us that a billion-dollar prototype collapsed because of a mistake smaller than dust? Impossible." Malik shook his head. "Not dust, resonance. A violin string tuned too tight will snap, not because of its size, but because of the stress inside it. This machine is no different." He tugged gently at the belt that ran along the assembly. The wear was uneven, the tension inconsistent. He held it up for the cameras to see. This belt carried the vibration until it tore itself apart. Replace the belt alone and the failure repeats. Balance the rhythm and the machine will sing. Sophia felt a chill at his words. They were not the speech of a man grasping for credibility. They were the words of someone who understood machines on a level deeper than diagrams. The investors whispered louder now. One leaned toward another. "He is not only diagnosing, he is teaching." The live stream comments erupted. "He sounds like a poet, not a mechanic. This man knows his craft." She mocked him, but he's explaining what none of them could. Angela Price, the HR director, sat stiffly, her pen frozen above her notepad. Every sentence Malik spoke made the emails, the jeers, the midnight sarcasm look smaller, pettier, harder to defend. Vanessa forced another laugh, but it wavered. "Machines do not sing, Mr. Carter. Do you think investors paid to watch bedtime stories?" Her words echoed awkwardly. The investors did not laugh with her. A few even scowled. The live stream comments turned against her. "She still doesn't get it." The CEO is tone deaf. Malik ignored the jab. He returned to his notebook, sketching a simple curve to represent the vibration, then drew a second curve slightly misaligned. He held it up. When two rhythms overlap but do not match, they fight each other. You cannot see the fight until it is too late. But you can feel it if you listen. Sophia stood to address the room. "This is why we have oversight. Not every problem is solved by more computers. Sometimes the flaw is human, an oversight in units, a failure to translate. He has identified what may be the root cause." Her words landed like a gavel. Investors nodded. The room felt heavier with possibility. The countdown clock showed 40 minutes left. Malik wiped sweat from his brow, but his eyes stayed calm. He had spotted the invisible flaw. The next step would not be analysis. It would be action. And for the first time that night, even Vanessa Caldwell fell silent. The hall's silence had thickened into something dense, almost tangible. Investors leaned forward in their seats, the red digits of the countdown clock glowing above them. 35 minutes remained. The live stream audience numbered in the tens of thousands now, pulled in by the spectacle of humiliation turning, unexpectedly, into suspense. Malik Carter knelt on the stage floor, his notebook open beside him. He flipped a page and began sketching quickly. Lines, curves, a small square attached to a shaft. His hands moved with purpose, his voice low but steady as he spoke. "The flaw is resonance," he said, turning the sketch toward the audience. "Two rhythms out of balance, feeding on each other. The shaft and the belt fight until one fails. The solution is not to rebuild the entire system. It is to absorb the fight." He reached into his toolbox and pulled out a small, ordinary part. A circular disc no larger than a child's palm, with a weighted edge. Its metal surface was unpolished, almost unimpressive. "A harmonic dampener," he explained simply. "This part weighs less than a book and costs less than $50, but it absorbs vibration. It turns discord into silence." The room stirred. Some investors frowned, skeptical. Others raised eyebrows, intrigued. Vanessa Caldwell let out a sharp laugh. $50? You stand here surrounded by a machine worth billions, and you tell us its salvation is a toy part from a hardware store? The laughter echoed thinly, hollow against the silence that followed. Malik did not flinch. He turned the dampener in his hand, letting the cameras zoom close. "It doesn't look like much, but sometimes the smallest part changes the entire story. A cushion beneath a chair leg and the wobble vanishes. A counterweight in a clock, and time keeps perfect pace. This dampener is no different." Sophia Mendez rose slightly, speaking to the hall with quiet authority. "For the record, his proposal is legitimate. Harmonic dampeners are a recognized solution in mechanical engineering. They cost little because they are simple, not because they are ineffective." She looked directly at Vanessa. "Protocol allows experimental fixes under my oversight. I will authorize it." Gasps rippled through the room. The live stream chat exploded with reactions. $50 fix for $1 billion truck? If this works, it's the best plot twist ever. CEO looks nervous. Vanessa's smile tightened like glass about to crack. "This is reckless. If the engine fails again in front of investors, NovaDrive will be the laughingstock of the entire industry." Sophia countered calmly. "If the engine fails, we are no worse off than we are now. If it succeeds, we discover truth." The words silenced even Vanessa. Malik turned back to the prototype. His hands moved quickly now, with the assurance of someone who knew exactly what he was doing. He loosened bolts, slid the dampener into place, tightened it with steady turns. Each sound of metal meeting metal rang sharp in the speakers, carried across the live stream like a heartbeat. The audience held its breath. The investors leaned closer. Even the employees in the wings, who had once mocked him, now watched with silent awe. Angela Price, the HR director, scribbled furiously in her notebook. She knew what this meant, not just technically, but culturally. If Malik succeeded, the narrative of NovaDrive would shift overnight. If he failed, Vanessa's cruelty would stand unchallenged. Either way, the company was being judged, not by its technology, but by the values it displayed. Malik finished tightening the last bolt. He wiped his hands slowly, then stood, facing the hall. His voice was low but resolute. "The part is in place. What happens next will not be flashy. If I am right, there will be no fireworks, only harmony." The investors exchanged murmurs. Reinhardt leaned forward in his office chair in Munich, eyes sharp. His aide whispered, "If it works, we commit." Reinhardt said nothing, but his fingers tapped the desk, waiting. Vanessa clasped her hands, her smile brittle. "And if it doesn't work, Mr. Carter? What story will you tell then?" Malik met her gaze for the first time that night. His eyes were calm, steady. Then at least the machine was heard, instead of silenced. The words hung heavy. They were not spoken like a defense, but like a creed. The hall quieted completely. Even the sound technician froze, his hand hovering above a switch. The only noise was the steady hum of the countdown clock. 30 minutes remaining. Sophia gave a single nod. "Begin the test." Malik stepped back. He placed one hand gently on the chassis, almost like a farewell touch, then signaled the control booth. Lights flickered. Power surged. The Atlas prototype shuddered once, as though waking from a long sleep. The room leaned forward. The live stream chat raced so quickly that words blurred into a stream of anticipation. The truck's engine coughed, then caught. A low hum filled the hall. Not jagged, not uneven, smooth, almost musical. Malik closed his eyes briefly, listening. He heard it immediately. The rhythm restored, the dissonance absorbed. The investors heard it too, though they did not have his ear. They heard stability, a machine no longer fighting itself. Vanessa's forced smile faltered. She turned to the investors, searching for sarcasm, for anything to diminish what had just happened. But for the first time, her words did not come. Sophia's pen scratched across her notebook. She whispered into her microphone. Preliminary result, stable, no signs of previous failure. The countdown clock ticked. 29 minutes. The test had only begun. But the silence of humiliation had already shifted into the silence of awe. The hall was so quiet, it felt as though the entire building had forgotten how to breathe. The red digits of the countdown clock glowed. 28 minutes. The Atlas prototype shivered under the renewed surge of power, its frame trembling like an animal unsure if it would rise or collapse. Everyone leaned forward. Employees who once whispered insults now pressed closer to the edge of their seats. Investors, their pens poised above notepads, froze mid-air. The livestream chat scrolled like a flood. "It's moving." "Wait, is it really running?" "Don't blink." The engine coughed again, then steadied. The hum that filled the hall was low, deep, and even. Not perfect yet, but no longer jagged, no longer chaotic. It was the sound of discord quieting into harmony. Malik Carter stood still, hands folded in front of him, his eyes closed for a brief moment. He did not rush to touch controls or to announce victory. He listened. He listened the way a conductor waits for the orchestra to align, every instrument falling into rhythm. Sophia Mendez leaned toward her microphone, her voice steady but carrying a note of surprise. "Stability observed. The harmonic dampener appears to be functioning." Her words rippled through the hall. Investors shifted, glances exchanged. Some nodded slightly, as though daring to believe. Vanessa Caldwell forced a laugh, brittle and sharp. "1 minute of humming does not prove success. Let it run. We shall see how long this fairy tale lasts." But her voice no longer carried the confidence it once did. Even she seemed to hear what others now noticed: the absence of the violent vibration that had doomed the prototype before. Malik walked slowly to the monitoring panel, his steps calm, deliberate. He did not boast. He did not answer Vanessa's taunt. He pressed one button and the data appeared on the large display above the stage. Numbers glowed across the screen. They climbed steadily, each one a counterpoint to the doubt that had filled the room. Efficiency metrics rose, 91%, then 94%, then 96%. Finally, the gauge settled near 97. Malik turned slightly toward the crowd. His voice was low, steady, without drama. Nearly 97% efficiency, almost perfect. The words hit the room like a wave, not shouted, not decorated with jargon, just simple truth, spoken plainly. The live stream erupted. 97%? He did it. A $50 fix saved a billion-dollar truck. Reinhardt, watching from Munich, leaned back in his chair, exhaling slowly. His eyes softened, though his mouth remained stern. He whispered to his aide, "This changes everything." The aide nodded, speechless. On the stage, Malik pressed another command. The Atlas prototype responded by moving slowly forward, its wheels turning with smooth precision. It was only a few meters, a cautious step, but it was flawless. No lurching, no shuddering, just steady motion. The crowd could not help themselves. Applause began, hesitant at first, then louder. It rolled across the hall like thunder, surprising even those who clapped, as though their hands had acted before their minds. Vanessa's smile cracked. She tried to recover, clapping slowly, but the sound rang hollow. The applause was not for her. It was for the man she had mocked, the mechanic she had dismissed as unworthy of the room. Angela Price, the HR director, lowered her pen. Her notes had ended. The verdict was clear, not from her words, but from the machine that now purred on stage. David Lynn, the board chair, leaned back in his seat, his face unreadable. But those close enough to see caught the faintest nod, as though a silent decision had been made. Sofia Mendez raised her microphone again. "For the record," she said, her voice calm but with a hint of pride, "the Atlas prototype is operational. Failure conditions have been resolved. Cause identified as measurement mismatch. Solution applied successfully. No further instability detected." The live stream chat blazed. History made. This man saved the company. Hire him as CEO. Malik did not bow, did not grin. He placed one hand gently on the truck, as though thanking it for speaking to him. His eyes closed briefly, the quiet pride of a man who had not sought spotlight, but had earned it nonetheless. Across the room, employees who had written the cruel emails shifted uncomfortably. Some looked down, ashamed. Others stared at Malik with awe, realizing the man they had belittled had accomplished what their entire team could not. Vanessa tried one last time. "Perhaps he was lucky," she said, her tone sharp. But the words fell flat. No one laughed. No one nodded. Even her allies on the board avoided her gaze. The prototype rolled another few meters, smooth as silk. Cameras caught every inch of its progress, broadcasting not just to the hall, but to investors across oceans, to journalists already rewriting headlines, to strangers typing feverishly into their phones. A moment earlier, NovaDrive had looked like a company collapsing. Now, because of a part that cost less than $50 and a man who refused to bow under humiliation, it looked like a company reborn. The countdown clock glowed. 22 minutes, but time no longer mattered. The verdict was in. Silence fell again, heavy but changed. Not the silence of dread, but the silence of realization. And then the applause began once more, stronger this time, echoing through the hall until even Vanessa could no longer cover her unease. Malik Carter, the man once mocked as a janitor, stood beside the humming Atlas prototype. He had not only fixed a machine, he had tuned chaos into harmony, and the world had heard it. For a long moment after the Atlas prototype rolled forward, the applause seemed endless. The hall echoed with clapping hands, a sound more powerful than engines or microphones. The machine stood humming quietly, almost modestly, as though it did not realize the weight it had just lifted from the company's shoulders. Malik Carter did not bask in the noise. He stepped back, wiping his hands on his rag, his gaze still on the truck as though making sure it would hold its promise. But others noticed what the applause meant. And for the investors, applause was only the beginning. Across the ocean in Munich, Herr Klaus Reinhardt leaned back in his leather chair. The heavy curtains were still drawn, but the glow of the live stream lit his face. For the first time that evening, he allowed himself a small smile. Commitment increased by 20%, he said calmly to his aide, who blinked in surprise. Sir, are you certain? Reinhardt nodded. Certainty is rare, but what I just saw is worth betting on. Not the truck alone, but the man who fixed it. That man is proof of resilience. Investors understand numbers, but what they crave is trust, and he has earned it. The aide typed furiously, already preparing the statement that would ripple through markets by morning. In the hall, whispers began to spread as word reached the front rows. Investors turned to each other, nodding, murmuring, recalculating. Some had come ready to pull out, convinced NovaDrive was a sinking ship. Now they scribbled new numbers. 20% more, immediate capital, faith restored. Vanessa Caldwell, still standing at the podium, heard the whispers. Her smile remained fixed, but her knuckles whitened where she gripped the edge. She had expected the applause to fade, the skepticism to return, the investors to side with her authority. Instead, their eyes now moved past her, toward Malik. One investor raised his hand for the microphone. His accent was heavy, his tone precise. On behalf of our group, we extend congratulations to Mr. Carter. His intervention has proven not only technical skill, but integrity under pressure. We will honor our commitment, and we are prepared to increase it by 1/5 immediately. The hall gasped softly. The live stream chat exploded. 1/5 more. They just added 20% on the spot. He saved them millions. Malik blinked, his hands lowering to his sides. He had not expected it. He had not even thought beyond the machine itself. The applause, the money, the sudden reversal of fortunes. It all washed over him like a wave he had not asked to ride. He inclined his head slightly, his words quiet but clear. The machine only needed to be heard. I was simply the one who listened. The humility in his tone struck deeper than any triumphant boast could have. Investors exchanged glances, some even smiled. For them, humility was rare in boardrooms filled with arrogance. It was refreshing, and it carried weight. Vanessa's laugh came sharp, too sharp, cracking in the air. Ladies and gentlemen, of course we are grateful, but let us remember, no single mechanic defines the future of NovaDrive. This success belongs to leadership, to strategy, to vision. The words sounded hollow, even to her own ears. Investors turned their eyes away from her. Employees lowered their gazes, unwilling to nod along. The applause had already spoken louder than her deflection. Angela Price, the HR director, wrote in her notebook, "Investors shifted loyalty, CEO diminishing credibility." Her pen pressed harder into the page than before, each word like a nail sealing the moment. David Lynn, the board chair, sat in silence. His face betrayed little, but inside he weighed outcomes. Leadership was not defined by words alone. It was defined by trust. And tonight, the trust had not flowed toward Vanessa. It had flowed toward Malik. The live stream continued to scroll. He deserves a promotion. This CEO doesn't deserve him. Investors are smart. They know who the real leader is. Malik remained quiet, still near the Atlas. He did not smile or lift his arms in victory. He simply checked once more that the hum remained steady, that the machine continued to run as it should. Only when he was satisfied did he step away. Sofia Mendes cleared her throat, her voice steady. For the record, the investor's statement confirms a 20% increase in commitment. NovaDrive will now receive greater capital than originally projected, and it is attributed directly to the intervention by Mr. Carter. The hall erupted in another round of applause. This time it was not tentative. It was certain, strong, and it rolled like thunder against the walls. Vanessa's posture stiffened. She forced a smile again, but even her allies on the board avoided her gaze. Her authority, once unshakable, now looked brittle, like glass under pressure. Malik bowed his head slightly, then looked toward the investors. Thank you. I only did what the machine asked. The rest belongs to the team. His words landed softly, like a final note in a symphony. Not loud, not boastful, but resonant. In Munich, Reinhardt closed his laptop, satisfied. Merit, he murmured, not pedigree. And across the world, strangers watching the live stream typed variations of the same thought. The quiet man had turned humiliation into harmony. The countdown clock still glowed, but time no longer mattered. The future had shifted, and everyone in the hall could feel it. The demonstration hall emptied slowly, like a theater after the final curtain. Reporters whispered into their recorders. Employees filed out in uneasy silence, and the investors vanished into side rooms, their aides trailing behind them with phones buzzing. The Atlas prototype was rolled backstage, still humming like a satisfied animal, its presence lingering even as it disappeared from view. But the tension did not leave. It followed upstairs, into the glass-walled boardroom of NovaDrive Technologies. The board members gathered around the long mahogany table, their faces half-shadowed by the city lights outside. The celebration downstairs had already turned into calculation up here. And at the center of that calculation sat David Lynn, the board chair, calm as stone. He rested his hands on a folder marked with the evening's agenda, though everyone knew the agenda had changed the moment Malik Carter placed that $50 dampener inside the machine. Vanessa Caldwell entered last. Her steps were sharp, her heels clicking against the floor like a metronome. She carried her smile like armor, but it looked thinner than it had hours before. She took her seat at the head of the table without invitation. David Lynn spoke first, his tone steady, almost soft. We will begin. Tonight's demonstration ended with unexpected outcomes. The understatement hung in the air like smoke. Everyone in the room knew what he meant. Angela Price, the HR director, adjusted her glasses. Her folder bulged with printed copies of the leaked emails, highlighted lines glowing under the boardroom lights. She placed them on the table with deliberate weight. These, she said, are now public. Internal correspondence mocking Mr. Carter. They circulated for weeks, and some were written by senior staff. Several bear the CEO's name. The papers slid across the table. Vanessa's name, bold at the top of certain messages, was impossible to ignore. Vanessa's smile tightened. Office banter, nothing more. Angela's voice sharpened. Not when broadcast during a live stream. The investors saw it. The media saw it. This is textbook workplace harassment. It creates liability, legal and reputational. And it was amplified in front of the world. The room fell silent. Even the hum of the city outside seemed to pause. David Lynn folded his hands. Ms. Caldwell, the investors increased their commitment tonight, but they did not look at you when they announced it. They looked at Mr. Carter. Vanessa's jaw clenched. With respect, David, no investor commits millions because of one mechanic. Their faith is in me, in my leadership. Leadership? Another board member asked quietly. What we saw tonight was not leadership. It was humiliation. If Dr. Mendez had not stepped in, the demonstration might have ended in disaster. Sophia, seated near the corner, lifted her head. She had been invited as technical oversight, but she spoke now as witness. I confirmed for the record. Mr. Carter identified the root cause accurately, proposed a valid solution, and executed it under pressure. His conduct was professional. He was interrupted, mocked, and still succeeded. That is leadership, even if it did not come from the top. The words landed like a gavel. Vanessa leaned forward, her smile gone now. So this is what it has come to? Replacing vision with grease-stained hands? Investors want strategy, not poetry about harmony. Angela Price opened her folder again, pulling another sheet. Vision is worthless if the culture rots beneath it. And right now, our culture is poison. These emails prove it. Harassment, mockery, intimidation, none of it sustainable. If we do not address it, lawsuits will come. And I assure you, they will not be small. The word lawsuits lingered like thunder. No boardroom could ignore it. David Lynn's voice remained calm, but it carried weight. We cannot afford arrogance disguised as vision. Tonight, Mr. Carter gave the company more than a fix. He gave it credibility. Investors saw that. The board saw that. The world saw that. Vanessa's hands tightened into fists on the table. And what do you propose? That we hand him the company? No, David replied. His eyes were steady, unblinking. But we must acknowledge what happened. Your conduct exposed this company to humiliation, liability, and risk. His conduct saved it. That is the contrast, and it cannot be ignored. The silence that followed was heavy, broken only by the faint ticking of a clock on the wall. Each second sounded louder than the last. Sophia looked around the room, her voice calm but deliberate. You have a choice. Continue rewarding arrogance and silence competence, or make the culture match the innovation you sell. If you want trust, you must start by respecting merit, no matter where it comes from. A murmur passed through the board members. Heads nodded, pens scratched notes. Even those who had once supported Vanessa found themselves unable to defend her tonight. Angela closed her folder, her words final. The world does not forget what it saw tonight. Neither should we. Vanessa sat rigid, her eyes flashing, but no words came. For the first time in years, she was not the loudest voice in the room. The board adjourned with no resolution announced, but everyone felt it. The ground had shifted. Malik Carter had not only fixed a machine, he had shaken the very foundation of power inside NovaDrive. As the members filed out, David Lynn remained behind, looking through the glass wall at the city lights. Quietly, he whispered to himself, merit over pedigree, listening over mocking. Downstairs, in the quiet garage where the Atlas prototype now rested, the truck still hummed softly, as though affirming the verdict already written. Morning arrived at NovaDrive with a strange stillness. The storm of the night before had not vanished. It had only settled into a heavy quiet. News outlets replayed the clip of Malik Carter kneeling beside the Atlas prototype, installing a part worth less than $50 and reviving a machine that had swallowed billions. Headlines circled the globe. Mechanic saves NovaDrive. The $50 fix. Humility wins where arrogance fails. Inside the company's headquarters, employees moved differently. The usual stiffness, the fear of Vanessa Caldwell's sudden temper, was muted. Conversations were softer, more thoughtful. Some carried shame, the memory of mocking emails that now hung in the air like smoke. But others carried hope. For the first time in years, the company had witnessed a moment of dignity. In a smaller conference room on the top floor, Malik sat quietly, his hands folded in his lap. He still wore his coveralls, though freshly washed. He had not asked for new clothes, nor for the meeting itself. Yet here he was, summoned by the board of directors. David Lynn entered first, placing a folder gently on the table. Angela Price followed, her eyes meeting Malik's with a mix of respect and apology. Sophia Mendez was also present, invited not just as an auditor, but as a witness to integrity. David spoke with his usual calm. "Mr. Carter, you know why we've asked you here." Malik shook his head slowly. "I only did what needed to be done." Angela leaned forward. "And in doing so, you saved the company. More than that, you revealed what kind of culture we have allowed to grow. For that, we owe you acknowledgement." He shifted uncomfortably. Not used to praise in this room, not used to being anything more than a background figure. David opened the folder. The investors made their position clear last night. Their commitment increased by 1/5. But they also asked us a question. Who will guide NovaDrive into a culture of respect and innovation? They were not asking about titles. They were asking about trust. He slid a document across the table toward Malik. "We would like to offer you the role of Senior Diagnostics Lead. You will oversee systems integrity, ensure voices like yours are never ignored again, and help us build what we're calling the Inclusive Innovation Task Force." The words settled over Malik like a weight he had not expected. He glanced down at the document, his name printed at the top. For a long moment, he did not speak. Angela smiled gently. "It isn't just a title. It's an acknowledgement that expertise does not wear only suits. It wears coveralls. It carries oil stains. It speaks quietly. And we must learn to listen." Sophia added softly, "Leadership is not always the loudest voice in the room. Sometimes it's the one who listens even when mocked. You proved that." Malik finally raised his eyes. "I don't need a title. I don't need power." David's voice was firm. "This is not about need. This is about responsibility. You showed the company what dignity looks like under pressure. If we ignore that, we betray our future." Silence stretched, heavy but not hostile. Malik's hands tightened around the rag he still carried, a habit he had never abandoned. At last, he nodded slowly. "If this is truly about building something better, not just for me but for everyone who has been silenced, then I accept. But I accept for the team, not for myself." Angela's eyes glistened. She knew humility when she saw it. She also knew how rare it was in boardrooms. David closed the folder gently, his voice low but resolute. "Then it is settled. Congratulations, Senior Diagnostics Lead Carter." The words felt surreal to Malik. He was still the man who had knelt beside the machine, listening to vibrations others dismissed. The grease on his hands did not vanish with the title. But the room looked at him differently now. Not as a janitor, not as a mechanic in coveralls, but as a leader born of listening. Outside the room, word spread quickly. Employees whispered as Malik passed in the hallway, their expressions carrying respect, even awe. Some avoided his gaze, ashamed of their emails and jokes. Others offered quiet nods, as if to say thank you. That afternoon, the company cafeteria was quieter than usual. A few employees gathered near Malik's table, hesitating. One finally spoke. "We owe you an apology. We laughed when we should have listened." Malik looked up from his simple meal, a faint smile on his lips. "Then let's not waste time on apologies. Let's do better work. Together." The words carried further than he realized. Employees told each other later, "He didn't shame us. He just asked us to do better." That evening, when Malik walked back into the garage to check the Atlas one last time, he placed his hand gently against the machine's frame. The hum was steady, almost content. "Thank you," he whispered. Not to the board, not to the investors, but to the machine itself. It had spoken, and he had listened. And in listening, he had changed everything. The morning after the boardroom meeting, NovaDrive's headquarters felt like a different place. The glass walls gleamed the same. The lobby bustled with employees carrying coffee cups and laptops. But beneath the surface, the current had shifted. Power no longer flowed to the same center. The arrogance that once set the tone of every meeting had cracked. And at the heart of that shift stood Vanessa Caldwell, still CEO in name, but no longer untouchable. She walked into her office with sharp steps, her heels striking the floor like defiance. The news feeds on the wall displayed looping clips of Malik Carter, kneeling by the Atlas, installing the small dampener, the engine humming back to life. Headlines scrolled beneath. "Humility restores trust. Investors choose merit." From humiliation to harmony. Vanessa clenched her jaw. For years, she had been the face of NovaDrive, the strategist who convinced billionaires to pour money into dreams. But now her smirk, her jeers, her marriage taunt, those had become the viral story. Overnight, she was not a visionary. She was a villain. The phone on her desk buzzed. It was a call from the board chair, David Lynn. His voice, calm as always, carried no softness. "Vanessa, we need to meet. Now." When she entered the boardroom, the atmosphere was colder than the glass walls. David sat at the head of the table, flanked by Angela Price and several other board members. Sophia Mendez was present as well, not as an auditor this time, but as a voice the board had chosen to keep close. David spoke first. "The investors have made their expectations clear. The company must reform, and your behavior during the demonstration placed us at severe risk, legally, financially, and morally." Vanessa folded her arms. And yet, the investors increased their commitment. They didn't pull out. Angela's eyes narrowed. They increased their commitment because of Malik, not because of you. And your emails, your public mockery, those are liabilities that could still cost us millions in lawsuits. Liability is not leadership. Sophia added quietly, "Respect is not optional in engineering. A leader who mocks competence is a danger, not an asset." Vanessa's smirk faltered, though she tried to hide it. "So what now? You want me gone?" David's voice remained calm, steady, cutting through the tension. "We do not want you gone. We want you changed. Effective immediately, you are relieved of direct oversight of product teams. You will attend mandatory bias and leadership training for the next 3 months. During that time, Mr. Carter will oversee diagnostics and innovation alongside our senior engineers." The words struck harder than any dismissal could have. Demotion was public humiliation in a different form, subtle but undeniable. Vanessa laughed, the sound brittle. "You would sideline your CEO for a mechanic?" "No," David replied evenly. We would sideline arrogance for the sake of survival. Titles mean nothing if the culture beneath them rots. Malik proved that. The silence in the room pressed heavy. Angela placed a stack of papers before Vanessa. The training schedule. Non-compliance is not an option. The board will monitor progress. For the first time in years, Vanessa felt her grip loosen. She looked around the table for allies, but none met her gaze. Even those who once echoed her sarcasm now looked away. Alone, she adjusted her suit jacket, trying to hide the tremor in her hands. Sophia broke the silence gently. Change is not weakness, Miss Caldwell. It is the only way forward. The meeting ended without ceremony. Vanessa left the boardroom slower than she had entered, her heels no longer striking like metronomes, but dragging slightly, weighed down by consequence. In the days that followed, the shift became visible. Vanessa still held her office, but her presence no longer dominated the halls. Employees who once flinched at her sharp remarks now moved with a tentative freedom. Some whispered that she looked smaller somehow, not physically, but in authority. The first training session arrived quickly. She entered a modest room, not the boardroom, not the stage, but a plain space with circle chairs and a whiteboard. The instructor, a calm woman with gray hair, greeted her warmly. "Welcome, Vanessa. Today we begin with listening." Listening. The very thing she had mocked in Malik. Vanessa sat stiffly, arms crossed, but as the session began, as stories were shared about bias, exclusion, and the cost of silence, her posture softened despite herself. She did not admit it aloud, but the words pricked. For the first time, she was not the one controlling the narrative. She was the one being asked to change. Meanwhile, Malik continued his work quietly, visiting the Atlas each day, mentoring junior technicians, speaking softly in meetings where his presence was now requested. He did not gloat over Vanessa's demotion. He did not need to. His dignity had already spoken louder than any insult could. At the end of her first week of training, Vanessa found herself replaying Malik's words from the demonstration. Then at least the machine was heard, instead of silenced. She had mocked those words then. Now, alone in her office, she whispered them under her breath, tasting their weight for the first time. The reckoning had begun. 2 weeks after the night of the demonstration, NovaDrive's headquarters felt like a different company. The Atlas prototype no longer sat as a monument of failure, but as a story retold in every hallway. Employees referred to it with new reverence, not as the machine that stalled, but as the machine that revealed who truly listened. At the board's request, a company-wide meeting was called in the grand auditorium. The last time employees had gathered here, humiliation had been the theme, Vanessa Caldwell taunting a mechanic on livestream. This time, the stage looked different. There was no spotlight angled to glorify one person. Instead, the lighting spread evenly, softer, more human. David Lynn stood at the podium, his voice calm but resonant. "We are here today," he began, "not only because of an engine that runs, but because of a lesson that cannot be ignored. NovaDrive has built technology, yes, but in building, we forgot something simpler: to listen." The room stilled. Screens across the hall projected his words for remote workers, the same way they had projected Malik's humiliation weeks before. But now the story was shifting. David continued. "From this day forward, NovaDrive will enact a new policy. No idea will be dismissed without review. No voice will be silenced by arrogance. We will form panels of cross-level employees to assess innovation, from the senior engineer to the junior technician. Every rhythm deserves to be heard before judgment. A murmur spread across the hall. Surprise, relief, even cautious optimism. Employees had long felt their ideas buried under hierarchy, mocked or ignored. Now they were promised something different. Respect. Angela Price, standing nearby, added her words. We will also enforce stricter standards against workplace harassment. What happened with those emails cannot be repeated. We are implementing mandatory training across all levels, not only for leadership. Dignity is not optional, it is required. Her tone carried the firmness of policy, but her eyes softened as she glanced toward Malik, seated in the front row. The audience followed her gaze. Malik sat quietly, not in a suit, not elevated above others, but in his clean coveralls. His posture was humble, his expression calm, as though he still could not reconcile the way his life had shifted. David gestured toward him. We do not change because of one policy or one decision. We change because one man showed us what listening looks like under fire. Malik Carter is now Senior Diagnostics Lead. He will chair the Inclusive Innovation Task Force, ensuring that merit is heard, no matter the voice it comes from. Applause swelled, not forced, not tentative, but genuine. Some employees stood, clapping with pride. Others looked down, ashamed at memories of the mocking emails they had written or laughed at. Yet the applause rolled on, carrying both gratitude and contrition. Malik stood slowly, the sound pressing against him like a tide. He did not raise his hands or bow dramatically. He simply nodded, waiting for the noise to soften before speaking. I did not fix the Atlas alone, he said quietly. Machines are never only one part, one hand, one mind. They are many pieces working together. The same is true for us. We succeed when we listen to each other, not when we tear each other down. I hope this task force is not about me, but about all of us, building something better than arrogance. The words lingered in the hall, heavier than applause, lighter than shame. They were steady, simple, and undeniably true. Sofia Mendez smiled from her seat. She had heard leaders give speeches filled with jargon and power. Malik's voice was different. It did not demand respect. It earned it by its very tone. Vanessa Caldwell sat in the second row, her expression unreadable. She had been required to attend as part of her training. The applause had not been for her, and she knew it. For once, she did not speak, did not interrupt. She sat silently, listening to the man she had mocked, and though pride still walled her in, cracks had begun to appear. Angela returned to the microphone. Let this day be remembered as more than policy. Let it be remembered as a shift, from arrogance to humility, from noise to listening, from pedigree to merit. The employees erupted again in applause, louder than before. This time Malik remained standing, though he lowered his gaze, uncomfortable with the attention. Yet his very discomfort deepened the respect in the room. As the meeting closed, employees filed out with softer steps, as though carrying something fragile, the possibility of change. In the hallways, conversations began anew. Ideas once whispered cautiously were spoken with a little more confidence. It would not be easy. Cultures did not change overnight, but the seed had been planted. That evening, Malik returned once more to the garage. The Atlas prototype sat silent now, its hum stilled after testing. He placed his hand against the steel frame, the way one might place a hand on a shoulder. You did more than run, he whispered. You reminded them to listen. The garage echoed faintly, almost like an answer. The days after the demonstration passed in a blur of headlines, meetings, and cautious applause. Malik Carter found himself in rooms he had never been invited into before, shaking hands he had never expected to meet. People spoke his name with sudden reverence. Yet for him, the noise outside mattered less than the quiet inside. One evening, after the board had finished their announcements and the investors had left the building, Malik slipped back into the garage where the Atlas prototype rested. The truck sat still, its steel panels gleaming faintly under the softer lights. The dampener he had installed was barely visible, tucked inside the heart of the machine. Nothing about it looked heroic, and that was what he liked most. It was simple, silent, almost hidden. He placed his hand gently against the frame, feeling the coolness of the metal. His mind drifted back years, to a smaller garage, a different hum, and the voice of his father. As a child, Malik had often sat cross-legged on the concrete floor while his father worked late at night. The smell of oil and iron filled the air, mingled with the faint whistle of a radio playing old jazz in the corner. His father never hurried. He treated every machine as though it had a story to tell. "Engines talk, son," his father would say, handing Malik a wrench that felt too heavy for his small hands. Not with words, but with rhythm. They groan when they're tired. They hum when they're content. They whisper when something's wrong. If you rush, you won't hear them. If you listen, they'll tell you everything. At the time, Malik had laughed softly, thinking it was just one of those fatherly sayings, like telling a child that stars wink or rivers sigh. But the older he grew, the truer it became. He remembered one night in particular. A neighbor had brought in an old car that refused to start. Others had tried and failed, declaring it finished. But his father had leaned against the hood, eyes closed, listening as he turned the ignition. He tapped a single spot, adjusted a belt, and said, "It's not dead, just out of tune." The car roared back to life minutes later, and the neighbor left shaking his head in disbelief. That phrase, "out of tune," had stayed with Malik. And years later, when Vanessa mocked him before the world, when the Atlas shook itself apart after 14 minutes and 37 seconds, it was his father's voice that whispered in memory, "Engines talk. If you listen, they'll tell you everything." He smiled faintly in the empty garage. That night, under humiliation and jeers, he had not been alone. His father's lesson had been beside him, steady as ever. Malik sat on a low bench, his notebook open in his lap. He scribbled not numbers, not diagrams, but words. Listen, patience, respect. 3 simple words, the same ones his father had lived by without ever writing them down. For the first time, he allowed himself to wonder what his father would have thought if he could have seen the demonstration. Would he have laughed at the idea of a $50 part saving a project worth $50 million? Or would he have nodded quietly, as he always did, and said, "The size of the fix doesn't matter, only that you heard what was needed"? Malik exhaled slowly, closing the notebook. The memory was more than comfort, it was clarity. Upstairs, he knew, meetings would continue. Policies would be rewritten, Vanessa would sit through her training, and headlines would fade into other stories. But for him, the heart of it all was simpler. He had listened. The machine had spoken, and the lesson came not from strategy or spectacle, but from the nights long ago in a dim garage, when a father taught a son to respect what others dismissed as noise. The sound of footsteps interrupted his thoughts. Sofia Mendez appeared at the door, her notebook tucked under her arm. "I should have guessed I'd find you here," she said softly. Malik stood, brushing his hands against his coveralls. Just checking on her. Old habits. Sophia walked closer, placing her hand on the frame of the atlas beside his. I've overseen hundreds of tests. I've seen failures, redesigns, panicked engineers. But last night was the first time I saw someone treat a machine like a living thing. You didn't fix it. You listened to it. That made all the difference. He shrugged modestly. It's how I was taught. Then whoever taught you gave you more than skill, she replied. They gave you empathy. And empathy is the rarest form of intelligence. The words warmed him, though he did not show it. He simply nodded, grateful but quiet. Sophia left him there, her footsteps fading. Malik lingered longer, his hand still on the machine. Thanks, Dad, he whispered, his voice barely audible even to himself. And in the stillness of the garage, the memory answered back, not in words, but in the rhythm of a lesson carried forward. Engines talk, and dignity listens. The next week brought an unfamiliar quiet to NovaDrive's hallways. Employees moved with slower steps, as if the echoes of the live-stream humiliation still clung to the walls. The cruel emails that had once circulated like jokes now weighed like stones in their pockets. Every time they passed Malik Carter in the cafeteria or the garage, they felt the memory of their own words hanging in the air. For Malik, the silence was heavier than any insult. He had always preferred quiet, but this silence was not respectful. It was guilty. And guilt, he knew, could drown a workplace as surely as arrogance. On a Wednesday afternoon, while Malik was reviewing diagnostics with a small team, 3 colleagues approached him. Their shoulders hunched, their eyes uncertain. They carried no clipboards, no tools, only hesitation. Malik, one began, his voice low. We need to say something. Malik looked up from his notes, calm as always. Go ahead. The colleague shifted uncomfortably. Those emails, we wrote some of them. I laughed at others. We thought it was harmless, just venting. But after everything, after what you did, it's clear it wasn't harmless at all. It was cruel. We owe you an apology. The others nodded, their faces red with shame. For a long moment, Malik said nothing. He studied their expressions, not with judgment, but with the same patience he used on machines. Then he closed his notebook slowly and spoke. I read those emails. I remember every word, but I didn't carry them with me last night. If I had, I wouldn't have heard the machine. I let them go because they weren't the truth. The colleagues exchanged glances, surprised. Malik continued, his voice steady. If you want to apologize, don't just tell me. Do better next time. Speak differently next time. That's the only apology that matters. The employees exhaled, relief mingled with guilt. One whispered, we will. Then they left quietly, their shoulders lighter than when they had entered. Word of the exchange spread through the company faster than the emails once had. People repeated his words. Don't just tell me. Do better next time. The phrase became a quiet motto, whispered in hallways, printed on sticky notes above desks, shared in group chats as both a reminder and a second chance. Later that week, NovaDrive hosted a small internal gathering, not for investors, not for reporters, but for the staff who had lived through the humiliation and the healing. A stage was set up in the cafeteria, simple and unadorned. Employees gathered shoulder to shoulder, waiting to hear what leadership would say now that the dust had settled. Sophia Mendes was invited to speak. She stepped up to the microphone, her presence calm, her tone clear. I have been part of many companies, many tests, many crises, but last week I witnessed something rare. Not only a machine restored, but a man who taught us what it means to listen. Malik Carter is not just an engineer. He is what I will call an engineer of empathy. The words rippled through the crowd. Some nodded, others looked down, remembering their own mockery. Sophia continued, "Machines require precision, but people require dignity." Last week, Malik showed both. He did not shout back when he was mocked. He did not seek revenge when he was belittled. He simply listened, first to the machine, then to the silence that followed. That is a form of strength no spreadsheet can measure. Applause rose, slow at first, then steady. Malik shifted uncomfortably in his seat, unused to such praise. When the microphone was handed to him, he shook his head lightly. "I don't have speeches," he said quietly. "I don't need applause. I just want us to remember that machines, like people, fail when ignored, and they heal when heard. That's all I did. I listened." The room fell silent for a moment, the weight of his words settling over them like a soft blanket. Then the applause came again, warmer this time, less for the miracle of the fix and more for the man himself. In the back row, Vanessa Caldwell sat quietly. Her training sessions had already begun, and though her pride still chafed, she could not ignore the scene before her. No one had ever applauded her with such warmth. No one had ever called her an engineer of empathy. She lowered her eyes. For the first time, perhaps, she understood the cost of arrogance, not in lost contracts, but in lost trust. After the gathering, Malik returned to the garage as he often did. He found a young technician waiting there, a notebook clutched in her hands. "Mr. Carter," she said shyly, "could you look at my design? I've been afraid to show it, but after what you said, I thought maybe—" Malik smiled softly, gesturing toward the workbench. "Let's take a look. Every idea deserves to be heard." And in that moment, the company's culture began to shift, not with policies alone, not with training sessions, but with a mechanic who listened when others dismissed, and who accepted apologies not with bitterness, but with hope. News traveled faster than the hum of any engine. Within days, Malik Carter's quiet victory became a headline not just in the business press but across the world. It was replayed on news broadcasts in Berlin, discussed on podcasts in London, debated on talk shows in New York. Everywhere the phrase was repeated with astonishment. A $50 fix saved a $50 million project. The irony was irresistible. Analysts who normally spoke in dense jargon found themselves using music metaphors borrowed from Malik himself. "The machine was out of tune," one journalist wrote, "and the mechanic who listened restored the harmony." In Munich, Reinhardt's firm issued a public statement. "We believe innovation is not only about capital, but about character." Mr. Carter demonstrated the character to listen when others mocked, and to act when others hesitated. Our partnership with NovaDrive will deepen. Stock tickers reflected the surge. NovaDrive's valuation climbed, not by billions, but by enough to silence its critics. The market responded not just to the prototype's revival, but to the story itself. A story that had become a parable of merit over pedigree. European production teams adopted Malik's design immediately. In a factory outside Stuttgart, engineers fitted trucks with the same harmonic dampener he had installed. Workers smiled as they repeated the phrase to each other, half in jest, half in awe. A part smaller than a hand saved a project larger than a nation's budget. News crews filmed the assembly line, capturing the moment when one of the new trucks rolled forward, humming steadily. The foreman, wiping grease from his palms, looked into the camera and said, "We had teams of experts overlook this flaw, but one man listened. That is why we are here today." The clip went viral, subtitled into half a dozen languages. In the United States, think tanks began using the story in leadership seminars. "Do not be Vanessa Caldwell," one lecturer warned. "Do not mock the quiet voices in your team. They may hold the key to your survival." Slideshows showed stills of Malik beside the Atlas, coveralls stained, head bowed in concentration. Schools picked up the tale too. A teacher in Chicago told her students, "Sometimes the smartest person in the room is the one who speaks last. Sometimes the greatest solution costs less than your lunch money." The children laughed, but they understood. Malik himself avoided the noise. While the world repeated his name, he continued working in the garage, preferring the hum of engines to the chatter of headlines. Still, the impact found him. Letters arrived at NovaDrive, handwritten and typed, from strangers who had never touched a wrench in their lives. One was from a farmer in Iowa. "Mr. Carter, I don't know much about trucks, but I know about listening. Your story reminded me that when my soil is quiet, it's telling me what it needs. Thank you." Another came from a teacher in Ghana. "My students watched the video of you fixing the prototype. They now believe that patience is power. They want to become engineers who listen." Malik read each letter carefully, often in the stillness of late nights, when the garage was quiet and the Atlas stood like a sentinel at rest. He never knew how to respond, but he carried the words with him, grateful and humbled. Meanwhile, inside NovaDrive, the story became woven into the company's very fabric. Posters in hallways showed the Atlas with the caption, "Every part matters. Every voice matters." Training slides opened with the phrase, "Listen before you lead." Angela Price smiled as she walked the halls, noting the change. She knew culture did not transform overnight, but she also knew symbols mattered. And Malik had become a living symbol of resilience, of humility, of the power of listening. Even competitors took note. A rival CEO, when asked about NovaDrive's sudden recovery, admitted grudgingly, "They were saved not by technology, but by a mechanic with dignity." We could all use one of those. The phrase, "mechanic with dignity," began to echo online, turned into hashtags, repeated in articles, whispered in corporate offices, where junior staff suddenly found their voices valued a little more. Malik, though, never saw himself as a savior. When Sofia Mendez congratulated him in the garage one evening, calling his solution historic, he only shook his head. "History forgets who listens. That's all I did. I listened." Sofia smiled softly. "And that is exactly why they'll remember you." The global impact was undeniable. Trucks rolled off production lines with dampeners fitted, each one humming in harmony. Investors committed new funds. Employees across the world found courage in the story of a man mocked as a janitor who saved his company with patience. And in living rooms late at night, parents told their children a simpler version. A man fixed a broken machine not by shouting, but by listening. Remember that. Thus, the story grew larger than NovaDrive, larger than Malik, larger than the Atlas itself. It became a parable repeated wherever arrogance had silenced humility. And it all began with a sound thinner than a strand of hair, and a man who treated it as music. Vanessa Caldwell sat in a chair unlike any she had known before. It was not the leather-backed throne of her executive office or the sleek seat at the boardroom table. It was a plain, cushioned chair in a modest training room, arranged in a circle with a dozen others. The walls were bare. The fluorescent lights hummed softly overhead. There was no podium here, no stage, no microphone to command. For the first time in years, Vanessa found herself in a room where her title meant nothing. The instructor, a calm woman with silver hair, smiled gently as she spoke. "We are here to unlearn what arrogance teaches us. We are here to listen." The word stung. Listen. It was the word she had mocked most. She remembered how Malik Carter had rested his hand on the atlas, listening as though it were alive, and how she had ridiculed him for it. Now, seated among junior managers and even interns, she realized she was the one being asked to do what she had once laughed at. The first exercise was simple. Each person had to tell a story of when they had dismissed someone's idea, only to later realize its value. Vanessa sat stiffly, her arms folded. When her turn came, she hesitated, her voice caught between pride and obligation. "I dismissed a man's approach," she admitted finally, "because I thought he was beneath me. He proved me wrong." The room was silent for a beat. Then the instructor asked softly, "How did that feel?" Vanessa swallowed. The words were heavier than she expected. "Like the ground shifted under me." The others nodded. Some even offered sympathetic smiles. For once, no one mocked her stumble. Week after week, the sessions continued. At first, she resisted. She sat rigid, offering short answers, her mind wandering back to boardroom triumphs and investor deals. But gradually, something changed. The stories she heard about employees ignored for their gender, for their accent, for their lack of degrees, began to wear down her defenses. One day, a young technician spoke about being told she wasn't leadership material because she was quiet. Vanessa listened, really listened, and for the first time she heard the echo of her own voice in those cruel words. It unsettled her. At night, she replayed the demonstration in her mind. Malik kneeling, the laughter she had encouraged, the way the investor's eyes shifted away from her and toward him, the way the applause had rolled without her name attached. For the first time in her career, Vanessa Caldwell questioned not her strategy, but herself. The transformation was not dramatic. She did not wake one morning as a new woman. But slowly, edges softened. She began arriving to training on time, no longer with the smug smirk of someone humoring the process, but with the quiet resignation of someone willing to learn. At work, she spoke less. In meetings, she listened more. When employees brought ideas, she forced herself not to interrupt. At first, it felt unnatural, like wearing shoes a size too small. But over time, she realized silence did not weaken her. It steadied her. Colleagues noticed. They whispered in hallways, "She's different." Not fixed, but different. Maybe the training is working. One afternoon, she found herself walking past the garage where Malik worked. The Atlas sat gleaming, surrounded by young technicians who now looked at Malik with trust. Vanessa paused at the doorway, unseen. She watched as Malik leaned over a table, examining a junior engineer's sketch with the same patience he had shown the Atlas weeks before. He nodded, asked questions, encouraged. There was no arrogance in his tone, no mocking in his expression. She realized he was doing what she had never done, building by listening. For a brief moment, jealousy pricked her chest, but it faded quickly, replaced by something harder to admit: admiration. She stepped back quietly, not ready to speak, not ready to apologize, but ready to see. Months later, as her training neared its end, The instructor handed her a final exercise. "Write a sentence," the instructor said, "that you would tell your younger self if you could." Vanessa stared at the blank page for a long time. At last, she wrote 7 words. "Even leaders can learn if they listen." When she read the sentence aloud, her voice wavered. The room was silent. Then someone clapped softly. Others joined in. It was not applause for power. It was acknowledgement of honesty. Vanessa lowered her eyes, humbled. For once, she did not fight the quiet. She accepted it. The road ahead would not be easy. She was not redeemed overnight. But the cracks had opened. The arrogance that once ruled her had begun to loosen its grip. And as she left the training room, the words echoed in her mind, simple but steady. Even leaders can learn if they choose to listen. The announcement came on a Friday afternoon. The deal with Reinhardt's firm was finalized. Not only had the investors upheld their promise, they had increased their commitment by 1/5. The news spread through NovaDrive's offices like sunlight breaking through storm clouds. By evening, the company organized a celebration. Balloons floated in the cafeteria. Caterers laid out long tables of food that smelled rich and sweet. A banner stretched across the wall. "To New Horizons." Employees, once anxious and subdued, now laughed openly, their relief almost giddy. Music played through the speakers. People clinked glasses, raising toasts not just to the investors, but to survival itself. And yet, as voices swelled and feet tapped against the floor, Malik Carter stood quietly near the edge of the room. He wore a freshly pressed shirt instead of coveralls, but his modest posture had not changed. Colleagues approached him one by one, offering handshakes, claps on the back, even awkward apologies wrapped inside congratulations. "Malik, you saved us. Couldn't have done it without you. Thank you for making us believe again." He nodded at each, smiling gently, but his eyes wandered often toward the window. Outside, the city lights blinked, indifferent to the clamor inside. At one point, David Lynn found him standing alone with a glass of water. "You don't enjoy celebrations?" David asked softly. Malik shrugged. "Machines don't cheer when they work. They just work. Maybe I'm more like them." David chuckled. "Humility is rare in these halls. Don't lose it." Then, with a nod, he left Malik to his quiet corner. The party roared on. Vanessa Caldwell was present too, though not in her usual commanding posture. She stood apart, quieter than usual, offering polite smiles, accepting congratulations with measured humility. No one mistook her for the hero of the night. She seemed to know it herself. Sofia Mendez raised a toast midway through the evening. "To listening," she declared. "To patience. To humility. These are not just values for mechanics. They are values for leaders. May NovaDrive never forget the lesson we learned here." Glasses clinked, applause filled the air, and for a moment, the cafeteria glowed with warmth. But Malik slipped out before the party ended. The noise felt too heavy. He preferred another kind of celebration. He walked through quiet streets until he reached his small apartment. Inside, his mother had laid the table with care. His sister had prepared rice and stew, simple and comforting. A nephew climbed onto his lap, asking, "Uncle Malik, did you really fix the biggest truck in the world?" Malik laughed softly, shaking his head. "Not the biggest, just the one that needed listening." They ate together, laughter rising easily, not forced by corporate relief, but born of love. The food was modest, the chairs a little wobbly, but the dignity in the room was stronger than any banner or toast. His mother raised her glass of juice at the end of the meal. "To Malik," she said, her eyes shining. Not for fixing a truck, but for remembering his father's lesson. Listening is strength. The family clinked their glasses together. Malik lowered his head, humbled more by their words than by all the applause he had received at work. Later that night, after the dishes were cleared and the laughter faded into the soft rhythm of the city outside, Malik stepped onto the balcony. He looked up at the stars, his thoughts quiet but steady. The world saw him as the man who had saved a company with a part that cost $50. But in his heart, he knew it was simpler. He had listened. That was all. And in that listening, dignity had been restored, not just for him, but for everyone who now dared to believe their voice mattered. When the noise fades and the parties end, what remains is not the applause, not the headlines, not even the contracts signed in boardrooms. What remains are the echoes of dignity, the kind that slips quietly into memory and stays there long after the spotlight moves away. The story of NovaDrive was never only about engines. It was about the fragile balance between arrogance and humility, between mocking and listening. Consider what happened that night in the demonstration hall. A machine worth tens of millions faltered. A company on the verge of collapse trembled. The investors leaned forward, expecting failure. And in that moment, it was not the loudest voice, not the person with the grandest title who saved the day. It was a man in coveralls who bent low, placed his hand on steel, and listened. Listening. Such a simple act, yet so rare. In boardrooms, voices fight to be louder, sharper, quicker. In meetings, people interrupt, defend, and dismiss. But Malik Carter showed the world something different. That sometimes the greatest strength is not in speaking, but in hearing what others ignore. He listened to a machine others called broken. He listened when arrogance tried to silence him. And by listening, he restored not only the Atlas prototype, but the dignity of every quiet voice dismissed in a noisy room. Think about the lessons tucked inside that moment. Merit does not come wrapped in titles. Humility does not announce itself with banners. Dignity is not bought with contracts or applause. All of these live in the simple human act of respect. Machines fail when vibrations are ignored. People fail when voices are dismissed. But harmony returns when we choose patience over pride, humility over mockery, and listening over shouting. Perhaps this is why Malik's story traveled far beyond the factory floor. It was retold in classrooms, where teachers reminded children that the quiet student might hold the sharpest insight. It was shared in farms and workshops, where people nodded and said, "Yes, I know what it means to listen." It was quoted in offices, where managers realized that power without empathy is nothing more than noise. And at the heart of it all was a truth as steady as the hum of an engine brought back into tune. Listening is dignity, and dignity changes everything. Malik did not rise by demanding attention. He rose by giving attention to rhythms, to details, to silence. He proved that the smallest part can steady the largest machine, and the smallest voice can steady the largest company. Vanessa Caldwell, the CEO who once mocked him, learned her own quiet lesson. Not through public defeat alone, but through the harder work of humility. Even leaders can learn if they choose to listen. And perhaps that too is a form of hope, that arrogance is not permanent, that change is possible. So what does this mean for us? Listening now in the soft hours of evening. It means that dignity is not a grand gesture. It is the choice to pause before speaking, to give space for another voice, to treat even silence with respect. It is remembering that harmony is never born from one note shouting over the others, but from many notes finding rhythm together. The Atlas prototype still runs, fitted with a dampener that costs less than a night out for dinner. But its true legacy is not in steel or contracts. It is in the way people now whisper its story. A story of merit over pedigree, listening over mocking, humility over arrogance. And when the noise of the day grows too loud, when pride tempts us to interrupt, when arrogance tempts us to dismiss, perhaps we can remember Malik Carter, a man who bent low to a machine and heard its whisper. In the end, harmony is not found in the loudest voice. It is found in the quiet ear that listens. In the end, when the factory lights dimmed and the cameras switched off, what remained was not the drama of humiliation, nor the noise of corporate theater, but something much quieter. A hum restored, a dignity repaired, a lesson remembered. The Atlas prototype still stood in the garage, its frame steady, its heart tuned. But the machine itself was no longer the center of the story. The true center was a man who showed that respect, patience, and humility can shift an entire company, an entire culture, even an entire world. Malik Carter did not shout to be heard. He did not demand recognition. He did not bargain with arrogance. He simply listened. And by listening, he turned chaos into harmony. That is the power of dignity. It costs nothing, but it can change everything. When a CEO mocked him before investors, when colleagues laughed at his silence, when the world assumed his voice was too small to matter, Malik chose not to respond with anger. He chose stillness. He chose humility. And that choice revealed a truth too often forgotten. The quiet ear can be stronger than the loudest voice. We live in a world filled with noise, arguments, interruptions, the rush to prove and to outshine. But stories like this remind us that true strength is often gentle, that listening is not weakness, but wisdom, that patience is not silence, but presence. Think of the lessons that linger here. Merit matters more than pedigree. Listening matters more than mocking. Humility matters more than arrogance. Even leaders can learn if they choose to listen. Even companies can change if they choose to respect. And even machines can sing again if someone cares enough to hear their hidden rhythms. So as you drift into the softer hours of the night, let this story stay with you, not as a corporate tale, but as a human one. When you find yourself in a room filled with louder voices, remember Malik. When you are tempted to dismiss the quiet person, remember the Atlas. When you wonder if dignity makes a difference, remember that a part smaller than your hand saved a project larger than nations. Harmony was not found in the loudest voice. It was found in the quiet ear that listened. And maybe, just maybe, we can carry that with us tomorrow. Because dignity costs nothing, but it changes everything.